Welcome to Creative Imperfections, the podcast where perfection is overrated and messy magic gets the spotlight. I'm so glad you're here. As some of you may know, I've been deep in the writing process lately, and it's funny how predictable my inner critic becomes when I'm doing something that actually matters to me. Every time I sit down to write, there it is again, popping into the cockpit like it's been there all along, offering commentary I certainly did not ask for. I've come to call that voice my pessimistic co-pilot because it doesn't usually scream or insult. It usually questions and cautions and reminds me of every possible way this could all go wrong, all while insisting that it's just being realistic. Writing has a way of inviting that voice forward, especially when the work feels vulnerable and unfinished. And noticing it show up again has been a reminder to me that the inner critic doesn't disappear when you grow. It just finds new moments to make itself known. I've learned over the years that my inner voice isn't always the most encouraging narrator. And instead of pretending that isn't true, I finally gave it a name. I call it my pessimistic co-pilot, not because it's evil or trying to sabotage me, but because it always assumes turbulence before the plane has even left the runway. My pessimistic co-pilot is very convincing. It speaks in a tone that sounds reasonable, even protective. It doesn't usually yell. It offers commentary, little observations, warnings disguised as logic. It reminds me of past mistakes, points out what could go wrong. There's so much that could go wrong, and quietly questions whether I'm actually ready, qualified, or capable. All while insisting it's just trying to help. And the tricky part is that for a long time, I believed it. I thought that voice was intuition, or realism, or even wisdom earned through my experiences. I assumed that if something sounded cautious and familiar, it must be true. But over time, I started noticing something important. My pessimistic co-pilot never helped me move forward. It only helped me stay safe, small, and certain. That voice doesn't show up when things are easy. It shows up right at the edge of growth, when I'm about to try something new, when I'm stepping into visibility, when I'm expanding beyond what I've already proven I can handle. And it always asks the same questions. What if this doesn't work? What if you fail? What if you embarrass yourself? What if you're wrong about what you want? The problem isn't that the voice exists. Everyone has one. The problem is when we let it sit in the pilot's seat. For a long time, I thought the goal was to silence my inner critic, to get rid of it completely. But that never worked. The more I fought it, the louder it got, and the more I tried to outrun it, the faster it kept up. What actually changed things was when I realized that the voice didn't need to disappear. I just needed to give it a different role. A co-pilot doesn't fly the plane. A co-pilot gives input, and then the pilot decides. So once I started seeing my inner critic as information instead of instruction, something shifted. I stopped arguing with it. I stopped trying to prove it wrong. Instead, I started acknowledging it without obeying it. When my pessimistic co-pilot pipes up now, I notice it. I name it, I let it finish its sentence, and then I ask a different question. Not, is this voice right, but rather, is this voice aligned with where I'm trying to go? Because I don't know about you, but my inner critic is excellent at predicting risk based on the past. It's terrible at imagining growth. It wants certainty before action, proof before movement, and guarantees before commitment. But growth has never worked that way for me. Most of the meaningful things in my life happened before I felt ready, before I felt confident, before I had any evidence that it could even work. If I had waited for my inner voice to become kind before moving forward, I would still be standing at the starting line. And here's the part for me that changed everything. I stopped trying to replace the critical voice with a positive one. I didn't suddenly start telling myself everything would be amazing or easy or perfect. That feels fake. Instead, I started practicing a steadier voice, a calmer one, a voice that sounded like a trusted friend sitting next to me saying, I hear the concern, and we're still going. That voice doesn't argue with the pessimistic co-pilot. It doesn't try to overpower it. It simply keeps flying. Because the goal isn't to become someone who never doubts themselves. The goal is to become someone who doesn't let doubt make the decisions. There is a huge difference between having fear and being led by it. Your inner voice doesn't have to be kind to be manageable. It just can't be in charge. And the more you practice responding instead of reacting, the more space opens up. Space between the thought and the action. Space for you to choose something different. Space to move forward without waiting for internal approval. If your inner voice, your inner critic, has been loud lately, critical, pessimistic, discouraging, I want you to know that it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It usually means you're standing at the edge of something new. The voice shows up when the stakes feel higher, not because danger is imminent, but because growth is. You don't need to fire your pessimistic co-pilot. You just need to remind it who's flying the plane. And over time, something interesting happens. The voice doesn't disappear, but it quiets. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped handing it the controls. You showed yourself through action that you can move forward even with uncertainty riding along. And that's not confidence. That's leadership. And when you learn to lead yourself imperfectly, calmly, consistently, even a pessimistic co-pilot can come along for the ride without running the show. That's not silencing the inner voice. That's changing the relationship. And that's where the magic lives. And always remember, there's magic in your imperfections. Go out there and find it. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Creative Imperfections. If you have a friend who could use this advice right now, please feel free to share this with them and make sure you subscribe.